On a winter morning in the year 800, inside the vast stone walls of St. Peter's Basilica, a man knelt in prayer. Moments later, the silence of the basilica broke, as Pope Leo III lowered a golden crown onto his head. In that single moment, a king became an emperor, and Europe found the ruler it had been searching for since the collapse of Rome. His name was Charlemagne, a warrior of unmatched power, a ruler of unstoppable ambition, and the man who had shaped the foundations of modern Europe. To some, he was a savior who restored order. To others, he was a relentless conqueror. But to history, he stands as the architect of a world reborn from ashes. This is the untold rise of Charles the Great. Before Charlemagne's birth, Europe was a land drowning in chaos. The once glorious Roman Empire had crumbled centuries earlier, leaving behind abandoned roads, empty cities, and a fractured political landscape. A continent that had once been ruled by a single authority was now divided into countless kingdoms and tribes, each fighting for dominance. The Franks, the Lombards, and the Visigoths struggled to survive. The Moors pushed north from Spain. The Saxons raided from the forests of Germania. The Avars thundered in from the east, threatening the fragile settlements along the frontier. Trade routes were dangerous. Learning and knowledge had faded. Local warlords ruled by fear, and the dream of a united Europe seemed impossible. This was the world into which Charlemagne would rise, a world desperate for stability, for leadership, for someone powerful enough to restore order. No one could have predicted that a towering Frankish prince would one day attempt to bring Europe back from the brink of total collapse. Charlemagne was born in 742, the son of King Pepin the Short and Queen Bertha. Although records of his childhood are scarce, what little survives paints him as a boy destined for greatness. He grew up surrounded by warriors, diplomats, and priests, absorbing every lesson the unstable world had to offer. He was unusually tall, nearly 6'4", towering over nearly everyone around him. In an age when height was a symbol of power and intimidation, Charlemagne's presence alone commanded respect. He had a booming voice, broad shoulders, and a sharp mind capable of understanding the complexities of war and politics. Charlemagne wasn't raised as a scholar. He wasn't reading philosophy or studying formal sciences. Instead, he learned through observation, experience, and constant exposure to the harsh realities of medieval life. His training focused on riding, hunting, and combat, preparing him for the battlefield long before he ever wore a crown. From a young age, those around him realized that Charles was not just a future king, he was a future conqueror. When Pepin died in 768, the Frankish kingdom was divided between his two sons, Charlemagne and Carloman. It was a political decision meant to maintain peace, but it did the opposite. Charlemagne was confident, bold, and admired by powerful nobles. Carloman, on the other hand, was cautious, withdrawn, and often mistrusted by the aristocracy. Their uneasy partnership pushed the kingdom toward the brink of civil war. Court alliances formed, tensions rose, advisors whispered of betrayal, and then, suddenly and mysteriously, Carloman died in 771. His death shocked the kingdom, and many suspected political plotting, but no evidence was ever recorded. With Carloman gone, Charlemagne inherited the entire Frankish kingdom. At only 26, he now commanded an army, a nation, and the destiny of millions. From that moment, Charlemagne wasted no time. He began securing borders, building alliances, and planning military campaigns. The world had given him a crown, and he was determined to use it. From the moment he became the sole ruler, Charlemagne transformed into one of the most formidable military commanders in medieval history. The Saxon Wars, Charlemagne's greatest and longest struggle, began in the east, against the pagan Saxons. The Saxons were fierce, proud, and deeply resistant to Frankish rule. Their lands were filled with dense forests and difficult terrain, perfect for rebellion. For more than 30 years, Charlemagne fought them. Not once, not twice, but in dozens of campaigns. The Saxons ambushed his soldiers. They burned churches and rebelled whenever the Franks withdrew. Year after year, Charlemagne marched east, determined to crush their resistance, and after a major uprising in 782, he made a decision that still divides historians. He ordered the execution of 4,500 Saxon rebels in a single day, the infamous massacre of Verdun. Some say he did it to maintain order, others believe it was an act of ruthless terror. But one truth remains: the massacre broke Saxon resistance, and their lands soon fell under Frankish control. While fighting the Saxons, Charlemagne also faced danger from the south. The Lombards in Italy were threatening the Pope, attacking his territories and destabilizing the region. Charlemagne marched across the Alps, a feat that required immense strength and logistical skill. He besieged their capital, deposed their king, and in a historic moment declared himself King of the Lombards. No Frankish ruler had ever claimed such a title. With this victory, Charlemagne secured Italy and strengthened his alliance with the Church. The Moors and the Battle of Roncevaux Pass. Charlemagne then turned west, toward Muslim-controlled Spain. He attempted to expand his empire into the Iberian Peninsula, seeking to strengthen Christian influence. But during his retreat through the narrow mountain passes of the Pyrenees, his rear guard was ambushed. The clash was sudden, brutal, and deadly. One of his commanders, Roland, was killed, a story that later inspired the famous epic The Song of Roland. Even Charlemagne's defeats would become legends. To the southeast, the Avar Cogonat threatened Europe with powerful cavalry forces. Charlemagne crushed them, captured their great ring fortress, and seized immense treasure that enriched his empire. He then extended his rule into Bavaria, integrating it into the Frankish world. By the end of his military campaigns, Charlemagne controlled a vast domain stretching from the Atlantic coast to the borders of Eastern Europe. He had carved an empire out of fractured kingdoms, something no ruler had accomplished since ancient Rome. But Charlemagne's greatness wasn't built on war alone. Despite being a warrior king, he cared deeply about rebuilding civilization. Under his rule, the Carolingian Renaissance began a revival of learning, culture, and administration across Europe. He established schools attached to monasteries and cathedrals, ensuring education spread throughout his lands. He brought in scholars from distant regions, such as Alcuin of York, to advise him and teach his people. He standardized writing into a clean, readable script known as Carolingian minuscule, the ancestor of modern European handwriting. He reformed laws, unified currency, improved trade, and restored infrastructure. Charlemagne's court became a center of culture and learning. He admired knowledge, even though he struggled with reading and writing himself. He kept a tablet under his pillow, hoping to practice letters at night. Charlemagne brought order to a broken continent, not just through force, but through imagination, the crowning of the emperor. Then came the moment that cemented his legacy forever. On Christmas Day, in the year 800, Charlemagne attended Mass in St. Peter's Basilica. As he knelt in prayer, Pope Leo III unexpectedly placed a golden crown on his head, proclaiming him Emperor of the Romans. In that instant, the Western Roman Empire, thought dead for over 300 years, was reborn. Some say Charlemagne was surprised. Others believe he and the Pope had planned it. But the result was the same. Charlemagne became the spiritual and political successor of ancient Rome. His empire now stood as the most powerful Christian kingdom in the West. This coronation reshaped European identity. It solidified the Church's influence, and it announced to the world that Europe had found a new emperor. But no great ruler escapes controversy. Charlemagne's methods, especially toward pagans, were often severe. His laws punished those who refused baptism with death. His campaigns brought destruction to many communities. His personal life was equally complex, with multiple marriages, numerous children, and political alliances formed and broken. He constantly struggled with the Church over authority. He faced rebellion from nobles, resistance from tribes, and pressure to maintain unity in a massive empire. Even as the father of Europe, Charlemagne's reign carried a darker side that history cannot ignore. In his later years, Charlemagne slowed down. The long campaigns, stresses of ruling a vast empire, and the burden of leadership began to take their toll. He dealt with illness, fatigue, and the growing pressure to secure a peaceful succession. In 814, at the age of 6, Charlemagne died in his palace at Aachen. the city he loved and developed, as his capital. He was buried there, leaving behind an empire that soon began to fracture under the rule of his son, Louis the Pious. But though his empire weakened after his death, his impact did not. Charlemagne's influence on history is immeasurable. He laid the foundations for modern France and Germany. He revived learning and culture in a time once thought lost to darkness. He strengthened Christianity's presence across Europe. His laws, administrative reforms, and educational initiatives shaped governments for centuries. Later generations called him Pater Europae, the father of Europe. Charlemagne was more than a king, more than an emperor. He was the ruler who rebuilt a shattered world, united a fractured continent, and shaped the path of European history. The empire he forged eventually faded, but the world he inspired endures, and his legacy still echoes across Europe today.